Hi, everybody. Hopefully you can see me this time. I had to leave my beautiful fire because the Wi-Fi connection wasn't working. It is a little bit more fun to blame the spirits, though, so we can do that if you'd prefer. I wanted to make sure I finished telling you about vampires, so I didn't just tell you about that poor farmer and his children, and then not follow up with what happened. And I promise we'll keep working on our technical difficulties as much as possible. So, what about that farmer and his children? Well, it would seem an unremarkable story, one that they were familiar with the 1600s and 1700s of these terrible diseases, if it weren't for the dream. And of course, his dream came to be that he didn't lose half his crops, but he lost half his children. And that's terrifying enough. But when there were neighbors of theirs, years later, the Browns, who too fell ill with consumption near Warwick, Rhode Island, they looked to this family and they had heard something about this family that in order to stop the disease of consumption, they had blamed their deceased loved ones from being vampires. And when they went to dig up the family to see if it was possible that they were vampires. Vampires not being just these blood sucking people that could walk around, but people rising from the grave. When they dug up the family to see if they could be those, six of the deceased had already decomposed, as it were. So there was no room for anything demonic to live in them. But one of them had not. And suffice to say, they determined that was the child that was coming back to kill the family. So they took her heart out, burned it to ash. And when the Browns later fell ill with consumption and kept losing their family members, they learned of this practice to take the hearts out and burn them to ash. But by this point, the doctor had changed the recommendation and had changed the recommendation to the sick eating the ash that remained of the heart. Now, that was Rhode Island, and that was a brutal way to deal with consumption, but they truly believed that vampirism was the cause of consumption. And this was 50 to 100 years later, accordingly, before Bram Stoker even wrote anything about a vampire. So, what about Connecticut, though, where we are? Well, our most famous story comes from Jewett City, and it comes from the Ray family. And they had become quite ill again with consumption. And 3 out of 6 family members perished. One of them was gravely ill. They were desperate to find out what was going on, and no one knew why, but they started digging up their deceased relatives, and sure enough, they found one of them had not decomposed. Okay, so did they take the heart out? No. They cut the head off and crossed the femur bones across the chest and reburied that person. And the rest of their family survived. So they thought that that might have worked. And then it was revealed that the neighbors that lived next to their property 50 years before the American Revolution, they were called the Waltons. And they had 6 family members that died of consumption. They were dug up years later in some archaeological research, and their bones were found. Femur bones crossed over the chest, and the heads removed. So it's likely that the Rays of Jewett City learned this from their neighbors in nearby Hopeville. So yes, the vampires of Connecticut and Rhode Island might be a bit different than what you and I are familiar with. People sick with consumption, knowing there was no cure because they couldn't figure out the disease wasn't being cured by bloodletting, which was what they typically did. So the only cause could be that the devil, much like the devil walked through Machimoodus, was going to the graves of the loved ones, rising them from the grave, embedding the disease in the people that they loved, and the only way to save them was to prevent the body from being inhabited by the devil for the future. Now, I know that that is crazy. So what I want you to know is it's entirely true that this is what they did. Were they vampires? I'll let you decide. But the practice to avoid them was true. Now, I will also put, like I said, for the Machimoodus poem, some information on who the families were by name in the comments so that you can do some reading on them yourself. I wanted you to know that I will be working on figuring out how to have better streaming so I can come to you from the great outdoors instead of the beautiful indoors that we're all so used to right now for next week. But we will do what we can, right? As long as we get our spooky stories in. And I wanted to touch base with you about how we're trying to digitize content. This is new for us, so you've got to hang in there with us. But we just developed a Patreon account where we can film content that can be delivered to you. It doesn't always have to be live, but it can be. Where we can do tours virtually, where we can do all sorts of fabulous things, such as tarot card readings that are delivered to your inbox, video, or by email, rune readings, all sorts of things that us at Seaside Shadows want to deliver to you to make sure that you have supernatural, magical, historical, and spooky content regularly as we get through this world crisis together. So please visit patreon.com/Seaside Shadows. That's patreon.com/Seaside Shadows. Your support will help us to keep doing what we do so we can be here when we can walk with you again, which is our ultimate goal. We want to be able to still be up and running, have all of our guides, and so your support for digital content allows us to do that. The next thing, I'm your guide tonight. I'm the founder, and the other guides will be coming in at other times. When this happens, giving them a tip is incredibly welcome. So in the description of the first video, and I'll make sure to put it in the comments of the others, are the Venmos for each guide. So your guide that tells you the spooky story, you can send them a tip. You can do so on PayPal, and there's a tip jar on the Patreon. Those are great ways to support Seaside Shadows if you can. We know everyone's going through a lot right now, so this is if you can. We are working hard to make sure that we're researching new tours that we can do in person, but we're also researching all sorts of things to deliver to you. I have acquired some new legend books of Connecticut that I'm finding out things I never knew, and we'll also deliver to you spooky content from across the world. So please, stay in touch with us. Every Sunday we'll be here. I will hang in there with you no matter what happens with the digital media, and I will make sure that we get videos to you in spooky stories and hopefully a little bit more seamlessly. So from all of us at Seaside Shadows, thank you for tuning in. I hope the vampires don't come get you. And as my dad would say to me after he read me Salem's Lot at night, if they come to the window, don't let them in.